Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Outlaw Rogue in PvP in patch 9.1. This spec has saw quite a few buffs, and as it was my favorite spec, whether it is good, whether it is not, I think that patch 9.1 is the perfect opportunity to pick up your Outlaw Rogue, craft yourself a green skin legendary for the big pistol shots, or there are actually a couple of different legendaries you could choose, because this spec now cleaves. This spec has great sustain damage and very strong tanky honor talents in order to make you so much more durable. Like, Outlaw Rogues have always been seen as kind of supposed to be a brawler spec. Like, you're a brawler rogue that doesn't hide in shadows, you want to kind of tussle with enemies one-on-one, and it looks like you'll actually be able to do that in patch 9.1. So take a look at the spec, at exactly everything that is new and it's different from Outlaw Rogues of previous patches. Take a look at the talents and the builds that you might want to run in PvP. First, let's take a look at a variety of different changes. Outlaw Rogues now do 50% more damage with Blade Flurry. That means when you are out in PvP situations like arenas and battlegrounds, when you press Blade Flurry, you are now cleaving for 60% of the single target damage to nearby enemies, up to 4 extra targets. Which means for Outlaw Rogue, your cleave potential is actually a lot higher than it ever was. The fact that you have a pretty high cap of how many targets you can cleave onto in a 2v2 or a 3v3 scenario means you can actually spread quite a lot of damage across a whole enemy team if they're stacked together. And I imagine with extra cleave damage, it might make the spec pretty decent in some cleave heavy compositions, but definitely damage shouldn't be an issue when it comes to hitting multiple enemies. Also, Blizzard buffed the base damage of your Sinister Strike, so now it deals 20% more damage in PvP combat. This, while might seem like not a lot, it's quite significant because this is our main comp point builder, Sinister Strike, outside of Pistol Shot procs, which we usually use just for the procs. Sinister Strike is the main ability we spam to build comp points, and having this ability do more damage means our sustained damage goes way up. Between the Eyes rank 2 critical damage bonus has actually also been buffed in PvP, so it now doesn't have as big of a reduction, which means you Between the Eyes as a finisher is going to do more damage. Also great for burst, so just overall we're seeing more damage with the spec in general. Let's cover some of the PvP talents that I recommend you guys should run. In the first row, we're gonna have Quick Draw or Weapon Master. Both of them are a great option. My preference is Quick Draw. I like that extra buff of damage to the pistol shot, the extra comp points that it generates. Just a huge fan. I think it smooths out the gameplay. But with the buffs to Sinister Strike, you actually could legitimately play Weapon Master, where your Sinister Strike baseline just has extra chance to hit the enemy additional time. With certain conduits, it actually might work out pretty well. At level 25, it's a choice between Retractable Hook and Acrobatic Strikes. If mobility is the one thing you're looking for Rogue, Retractable Hook cooldown reduction on your grapple hook is going to allow you to zoom around the map all over the place. Pretty good when you're playing against classes that have high mobility and you're just trying to escape their cooldowns by running away from them. If you are trying to stave off defenses like Evasion, Cloak of Shadows, or even a Vanish. Generally, Acrobatic Strikes ends up being better. You could kind of just keep the enemy at bay, and if you're careful enough, you can actually kite the enemy around in circles like a melee within that 3 extra dead yard range where they can't hit you, but you can actually hit them. At level 30, my preference is Deeper Strat. I feel like it synergizes super well into Outlaw because of some of the other talents that we have, especially as Aventio in particular, because you can generate comp points pretty easily. But you can also play Mark for Death if you want for a much faster opener. If you miss those Subtlety or Assassination Mark for Death Kidney Shot openers, you can do the same thing as Outlaw Rogue, but since the spec doesn't really play into that burst opener playstyle as much as the other two, this is why I prefer Deeper Strat for a more methodical, longer stuns, big burst combo with it. And level 35, I think Elysian is kind of like the go-to choice for any arenas and any PvP situations in general. But if you're running a lot of solo PvP or world PvP and you need more survivability, I think Iron Stomach is a very solid choice. At level 40, I think Blinding Powder is just way too good. You can take Prey on the Wake if you're playing with a team composition that's looking to lock down the enemy in a stun and burst them down very quickly, but generally Blinding Powder is just best because having a 1.5 minute CD on a blind rather than 2 means that the first time you blind the healer in an arena, they'll usually trade a trinket for it because it's a 2-minute cooldown for a 2-minute cooldown. It makes the most sense. But you'll have your blind back up faster before they get a trinket, which will get you a pretty meaty setup, especially if you have some burst behind with it. And at level 45, you can run Alacrity if you are lacking on haste. If you are a rogue that's swapping, let's say, from Subtlety or Assassination, but mostly Subtlety rogues that are stacking a lot of Mastery versatility, and you just don't have enough haste on your gear, Alacrity is a decent choice to start with. But I think eventually once you hit about 14, 15, 16% haste on your character, I think Dreadblades is a much stronger option. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown that will kind of take a global to activate, but your next Sinister Strikes, Pistol Shots, or ambushes for the 10 seconds will fill you full of calm points, together with Deepest Strat. And as a Venthyr Rogue, it's actually quite a lot of bursts together, and it's just fantastic because this is a really meaty bit of burst for this spec. And level 50, I prefer Killing Spree. I'm not a huge fan of roots, and Killing Spree gets you out of roots. It'll kind of follow the enemy for a little bit. It also can cleave with Blade Flurry for quite a bit of damage too, which can be nice if you're bursting down multiple enemies. But I mostly prefer Killing Spree because it'll break me out of roots and it'll slightly follow the enemy, at least for a little bit, if you're trying to lock him down. I think this ability for a 2-minute cooldown has the most amount of burst potential too. Blade Rush is a decent choice at a 45-second cooldown, slightly less damage for the use, but you get like a little bit of charge and a little bit of energy. This one can be okay against compositions that have a lot of kiting, like mages for example, but generally I end up playing Killing Spree in almost all situations. Then we got some PvP talents. Some of the 3 that I usually run for almost any situation are Controller's King, which gotten changed. Cheap Shots grants you Slice and Dice for 15 seconds, and Kidney Shot will restore 10 energy per calm point spent into that Kidney Shot. Together with Deepest Stratagem, you add 6 calm points for a long kidney. You actually get basically a full energy bar from using the ability. I like this one a lot. This one is more of a utilitarian, and this one can be dropped, but I'm just a huge fan. It gives Cheap Shots a purpose for the Outlaw Rogue spec. The Kidney Shot into full energy can feel fantastic when it comes to following a burst out of a stun. I'm just a big fan of how this talent in general plays, and I kind of try to run it in majority situations because it feels weird without it. Endurant Brawlers is another solid choice. This one is what makes Outlaw Rogue super tanky, especially if you have a healer that you play with in arenas. Can also be pretty good in BGs, but if you're constantly, playing solo and you're just kind of going for the big one-shot openers, Endurant Brawler might not be the best. But every 3 seconds that you remain in combat, you gain 1% stamina and a chance for your Sinister Strike to hit an additional time, which is kind of nice. More sustained damage, more survivability. You lose 1 stack each second while you're out of combat, and this buff of stamina and extra Sinister Strike hits builds up to 20 stacks. At 20 stacks, you have 20% more stamina, and you're 20% more chance for Sinister Strike to hit the enemy a second time, which is just fantastic amounts of damage, and again, amazing survivability. Dismantle is my favorite choice against majority of melee classes. As an honored talent, I generally run this in almost all situations, unless I'm going up against a bunch of casters where it might not be amazing. But being able to disarm an enemy's physical damage weapon is kind of nice against warriors. It's really good against paladins. It's really good against other rogues as well. Disarming an enemy can be massive, like disarming a rogue as they're trying to go for a sap on your healer. You actually need a weapon in order to be able to get a sap out of the blind. So you can kind of utilize that in order to kind of stop certain CC chains, but also stop bursts of other classes. Some of the other PvP talents that I'm a huge fan of, Thickest Thieves got changed, so this works really well into group gameplay. I'm a big fan of that one as well. That one can be okay, and maybe replacing Controller's King if you're playing arenas. Drink Up Your Hearties got changed as well. Crypts of Wild will heal for extra, and 60% of the healing also will heal an ally. This could be pretty good if you're playing double DPS or playing some solo gameplay out in the open world, and you just want more survivability in general. Then we also have Float Like a Butterfly. This is a new honor talent that was added. Restless Blades, which is the cooldown reduction element of Outlaw Rogues. As you spend calm points into finishers, it reduces the cooldowns of certain abilities. Restless Blades will now also work on your evasion as well as feint, which against a feral druid or a monk, this is an amazing honor talent to swap Dismantle for. It actually just locks out the whole burst together. And the fact that most pharaohs and monks are not expecting for you to have a minute-long CD of evasion or a minute 0.5 as their cooldowns come up, you just pop an evasion as they're bursting you down, or at least attempting to. It's actually so good. It just stumps the enemy team completely. I also like this one on against Beastmaster Hunters as well. Sometimes I feel like when you disarm a Beastmaster Hunter, you can stop some of their damage, but the kill shots and the pet damage still goes through. So Flow Like a Butterfly, Pop Evasion, facing the pets to reduce a lot of that damage can also be really nice in PvP. When it comes to your legendaries, I think honestly the best legendary you can get on your Outlaw Rogue is Green Skin Wickers. This one is insane. Between the Eyes has a 20% chance per comp point spent, and you should be using this at 5 or 6 comp points to increase the damage of your next pistol shot by 300%. This gives you quite a bit of a burst of damage, especially if you land a crit, and depending on what buffs you roll, like Broadside for example, is a really good buff that increases your calm point building damage by 20%, synergizes really well into the burst that you will develop with this legendary. Next, let's talk about some of the conduits that I think you should run on your rogue. Taking a look at some of the endurance conduits, Cloaked in Shadows is still really good even though it got nerfed. you might be able to use Vanish and then get yourself a little bit of a reset, or even use Vanish defensively to just gain a shield in order to take a little bit of damage from the enemy once you come out of stealth. Condensed Animosphere is actually pretty good. I've been running this one quite a bit. When you take damage, you heal for 4% of your maximum health. This effect can occur every 10 seconds. With all the different stamina buffs that you get as Outlaw Rogue through your PvP talents, you actually gain quite a bit of health over time. From Finesse Conduits, some of the ones that I like is Rush Setup, and the energy cost of Kidney Shot is reduced, same thing with Cheap Shot, Sap, and Distract. This one's really nice for a cheaper energy cost of Kidney Shot, which gives you back energy anyway, so basically it just guarantees that you'll be full of energy as soon as you Kidney Shot the target. Another one that's also pretty decent is Prepare for All. Landing interrupts gives you shorter cooldown on Cloak of Shadows. Dodging attacks reduces the cooldown of evasion, which can be also pretty good in cooldown reduction element, but outside of that, those are the best finesse ones in my opinion. Some of your best potency conduits, I think your Covenant potency conduits are actually all strong no matter what Covenant you play. Kyrian, Fae, Ventir, or Necrolord, all of them are pretty good. It depends what kind of gameplay you like, or if you even like using those conduits. If it's a Ventir and you're trying to do burst, Lash and Scars is a must-have for sure. Now, for the rest of the Outlaw Rogue conduits, I don't think none of them are necessarily super strong, so it really is up to you which one you want to run. Sleight of Hand reduces the RNG of getting bad rolls every time you press Roll the Bones, which if it's high enough of a percent to give you good buffs, or more than one buff, that can mean that you have more bursty goes, but again, it's just an RNG enhancer rather than anything. Count the odds can kind of be good. Ambush, Slaughter, and Dispatch, or Ambush, Flagellation I guess doesn't even count for it anymore. Ambush, Dispatch have a 24% chance per comp point to grant you a Roll the Bones buff you do not already have. This one is kind of okay. It's mostly a PvE conduit, but it can kind of work okay in PvP when you're bursting someone down and you generate a bunch of buffs, which could make you even deadlier by giving you more cooldown reduction, or maybe giving you a leech benefit. It kind of can be okay. I mean, buffs is kind of bread and butter of the spec, and when you have the right buffs, you're doing big damage. So getting more buffs as you're PvEing someone down is not a terrible idea. Triple Threat, I think, is the only one that actually has any damage benefit, but it's also very RNG. Sinister Strike has a 15% chance to strike with both weapons after it strikes an additional time. So Sinister Strike first needs to get a double hit, which doesn't happen 100%, but then you get a 15% chance of that double hit to turn into a triple hit, which can be okay in damage, but it's just so RNG that it doesn't really impact your gameplay too much. So this is why I say for potency conduits for Outlaw, you can literally run whatever you want to. Now let's talk a bit about basic gameplay of your Outlaw Rogue. In the opener, I try to get a Roll the Bones up and running at the very start. Right before you go into an enemy target with a cheap shot, or right as you open, is probably best, so then you get in the most value out of your buffs. Trying to use Roll the Bones too early into the fight, so then by the time you open up on somebody in the cheap shot and then your buffs fall off, that's gonna just feel pretty bad. In the opener, I don't really go for any big bursts. In most cases, sometimes, well, depending on my teammate, if they're trying to go for damage, I'll open up with a cheap shot, build up to however many comp points I can manage, and right before the cheap shot falls off, go into a Kidney Shot as my partner goes in for a bit of burst. That could be a decent opener for an Outlaw Rogue, which is not really a bursty opener spec whatsoever. You can take Mark for Death Kidney Shot to at least lock somebody down, but you're not really going to be doing burst in the opener. You're more of a setup spec rather than anything. After you get your initial opener, whether you go with a cheap shot or an ambush, you want to generate some comp points and eventually get yourself up a Slice and Dice. Slice and Dice is pretty low in priority, but whenever you have free comp points and you don't have anything to invest them into, Slice and Dice is going to increase the amount of damage output you have. Maintain Roll the Bones at all times, make sure that they never fall off. Just having a buff is better than having no buff at all. Outside of that, you want to go for a prep for burst with Between the Eyes. I wouldn't use Between the Eyes unless you're really about to go bursting right then and there, because Between the Eyes too early can give the enemy away that, hey, I'm about to burst on you. So try to say Between the Eyes for when you're about to set up for a bit of burst. The biggest burst combo that I can recommend for you as an Outlaw Rogue, mostly in Ventir, is to get full comp points. Activate your Dreadblade's talent, so you can now generate a bunch of comp points from your basic comp point building abilities. Land a Kidney Shot on the enemy to lock him down. Follow up with Flagellation to put up the debuff on him. Sinister Strike into finishers, or Pistol Shots into finishers as much as you can while you're bursting them down. This is going to do quite a lot of burst while locking the enemy down in a full 6 comp point Kidney Shot, which is going to last quite a bit. If during that burst you can get a Between the Eyes into a Pistol Shot combo, that's also going to add to a little bit of that extra burst. It's a really deadly combo that can be used every 1.5 minutes because Dreadblades lines up really well with Flagellation, so it's basically guaranteed combo. I wouldn't really use Killing Spree for burst, and I wouldn't really bank all your burst into a Killing Spree. It's a decent ability on its own, but it doesn't do like incredible damage. I think it does a fair amount of damage, but it's not like a big one-shot that it used to be way back in older expansions. Killing Spree is a decent follow-up ability after that burst, or maybe before it, but it's an ability you can use maybe when you have no energy whatsoever, but you want to continue doing damage to that enemy, or maybe you want to follow a druid as they're trying to round the bend around the corner. And outside of that, that's really about it that I can tell you when it comes to Outlaw Rogue PvP gameplay. This spec is a lot of fun. I think it's definitely improved in patch 9.1. It's definitely a better version of the spec that we had back in BFA when we really relied on corruptions. The poisons that Blizzard added and some of the changes to between the eyes and now some of the buffs to the damage, I think I'm making this spec a real contender. I'm a huge fan of what they've done with it so far, and I think this is the perfect time to get into some Outlaw Rogue gameplay if you've ever wanted to try Outlaw Rogue for PvP at all. If you love the idea of this big brawler that's cleaving enemies down, that's very survivable, with plenty of self-healing if you do end up running the talents for it, with crazy good bursts that doesn't really go for the big burst opener, but rather for more of a setup, then Outlaw Rogue will be your favorite spec. Also, Grapple Hook is fantastic, the other specs don't have it, and that's something that is unique to Outlaw as well. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, Discord link down below. You can leave your comments whether you want to check out Outlaw Rogue or have any questions there. But the easiest place to reach me always is the Discord link. So hit that up as well. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Enjoy Outlaw and patch 9.1, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.